Welcome to the Five Phenomenon Podcast. I am your host, Shane Hazen. With me again is Ted Haycraft.
He's actually still putting up with me.
Yes, I wouldn't put it that way. Today
Is my pick.
it's your pick.
But you said you hadn't seen it, and you had it on your list to watch.
Yeah, I won't. One thing I've been thinking about lately is we're going to do an egg timer to how long our preamble of when we start talking about the movie before we actually drop the title. But this title basically, you'd mentioned a different movie by this same director.
Yes, I did. I think we still should do it at some point.
Yeah, and I mentioned that there's another movie of his I wanted to see. But do you have a intro you're chomping at the bit to do?
No, other than this is an interesting. When this movie came out, this is an interesting time for me because I was coming out of my Holy Joe, my very religious days, where I thought I might go in the ministry. And I changed I finally confirmed my major as radio, TV, film at U of E. And I was becoming a very hardcore film obsessive. And I was right in the midst of the Coppola, Spielberg, Lucas, all that happening. And
The movie brats,
which I have I know the folks at home can't see this, but this was my Bible.
The book you're holding up right now.
And on the book, it's called The Movie Brats. And in it, there was a chapter in Coppola, Lucas, De Palma, Milius, Scorsese, and Spielberg.
And so, with the lack of complete build-up, you just dropped in the name. John Milius is the director we're talking about, and the movie we're talking about is
Big Wednesday, which that book was on. The movie hadn't got released when this book came out. It was on the verge of being released.
Really?
Yeah, that's how old this book is.
Because the other movie you wanted to do was A Lion in the Winter.
Winded Lion.
Winded Lion. Sorry.
Yeah. This is only his third feature film he directed.
Right.
He was a very
Dillinger was the first.
Yes, and he was a noted screenwriter. But it's funny if they wrote this book today, they came up with this book, Milius probably would not have a chapter anymore.
You mean just because of the people whose reputation?
Think about it. Well, even Coppola is a little dicey, but The Godfather's so big that it hold Godfather and The Apocalypse Now carries Coppola no matter what, even though he's been off the map somewhat. But Spielberg's active, Lucas is active in his own way. Scorsese's active. De Palma, it's a little dicey there, but he's still making films. But John had a stroke.
Writing books too.
Yeah, but John, we may talk about that later. But his health reasons. But he's way off that. And when I see articles now about these guys, the movie brats, the New Hollywood, or the Biscuit Book, the Rebels, and the Easy Rider,
Raging Bulls.
Milius almost is sidelined somewhat nowadays, a little bit, I think.
Well, he whenever he's mentioned, the sad thing with Milius is that it tends to be more from his force of personality, which, like, as we go more into this conversation, we'll talk about my impressions of that. But
right. So anyway, that's but yeah. So this is the Big Wednesday is like you couldn't get closer to the. Somewhat of a kind of a ground zero for me, where I'm just really so much into all these guys and what's happening, and reading Rolling Stone, and
all I'm hearing right now when we talk is the things are outside of the movie, not the movie itself.
What's that? Oh, about Milius?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nowadays.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Let's. I want to dive into that. That's the big thing I really want to pick your brain about. But
Sure.
We want to start out. These movies our talks on these movies are going to be spoiler filled. But beforehand, we'd love to sell you on this movie and why you should watch it. And Ted, do you want to go ahead and describe the plot of the movie? And
okay, the plot is basically you're following three close knit buddies. They're all top flight surfers. Gary Busey, Jan Michael Vincent, and William Catt. And basically the film is divided up in chapters of these giant swells that they're going to surf, and it's a coming of age story.
The chapters make a 3-year jump usually between.
Yeah, it goes like from the late mid '60s to the mid '70s, and then Vietnam War approaches in the background. They have to go through the draft. And that's kind of an interesting sequence. And the girlfriends and marriage and just growing up, and and it's based on Milius's he was a surfer, and he was growing up at this time period in Southern California, and he based a lot of it's very personal to John Milius, And it's also this really keyed into me. I guess I didn't really put it together back in the day, but it's kind of his American Graffiti.
Oh no!
Yeah.
The first portion, I definitely
Yeah.
had that feeling to it. This was my first viewing of it, as I mentioned earlier. This is the one that'd been on my radar to see for a while. I knew people loved it, and I, for the most part, enjoyed it. One of the things I read about it that resonated was that Milius was aiming to try to make it the "How Green Was My Valley" with only with surfing.
Yeah. I wrote this on the top just today, where it was a huge box office and critical failure.
The thing you always tell me about it, we talk about the
oh.
trading points.
Yeah, at the time, John's still a very highly regarded, very expensive screenwriter. Jeremiah Johnson, The Life and Time of Judge Roy Bean, the Dirty Harry, their first two couple of Dirty Harry films.
And he got to make this movie basically by cashing his chips on Apocalypse Now, which he had written but hadn't come out by this point.
No. In fact, it was going to originally be like a 16 millimeter art film with George Lucas directing.
Right.
And then it turned into this big thing that Coppola took over. So Spielberg was so real excited. He thought Big Wednesday was going to be a big hit. And so George and Spielberg and John all switched 1 point with each other on films they were making at the time, so that to make money, just as a friendship thing. And George's film was Star Wars, and Stevens was Close Encounters. So you can imagine how they felt once all these three films came out, and they didn't get George and Steven didn't get anything, and John's writing a little pretty on that.
We're definitely going to get into this. One of the Spielberg and Milius' relationship is a very touching one to me too.
And I wanted to also tell you, when I think I saw it in the theater, but we brought that in on campus on 16 millimeter shortly after, because back then, this is right before VHS came along, and you would play 16 millimeter films. They would be available to you shortly after the theatrical run, and you'd bring them in for campus. So we had two different series. We had a series of older films, and we had a series of the real current stuff.
I know you've mentioned one of these series on your episode. I forget the episode number, but the episode where I interviewed you, you mentioned one of these series. But
we brought in Big Wednesday, so I watched the thing 2 or 3 times at home on a projector in 16 millimeter, because you could watch it at your leisure before you showed it on campus. And I really liked the film. Here's my takeaway back then, and I will talk about this maybe later and modify this, but my takeaway, it seemed to me also, maybe I was listening much to the critics or whatever, it seemed to be a little flawed. It didn't seem to work. It didn't seem to coalesce together, whatever the word you want to use.
That was your initial takeaway?
My initial take, but I liked it, and I kept on watching it. And I've watched it over the years, and I bought the VHS and the DVD. I even have a laser disc of it, and I now have the Blu-ray of it. And watching it again just recently, I am watching and in just different portions. I really love this film. I can watch it all the time, even though I don't think it seems to have problems that I can't articulate. Maybe you will see if we can. I'm curious of what your reaction is.
I don't know if it's so much problems, but I started to formalize a lot more of my feelings about Milius, because a lot of my interpretation of Milius up to this point, from a filming standpoint, from what he's done, is mostly his screenwriting. I mean, Apocalypse Now being the thing I've probably seen of his most, and he's a thing that he's said, was rewritten beyond him, and you can tell. But then there's things like Jeremiah Johnson or his contributions to Dirty Harry, and the thing that when I was looking up stuff that was influential on him, John Ford seemed to be a big one, but he also talked about the Beats and mainly Kerouac, and he was really, for someone who's known as a screenwriter, he bragged about not liking tight, direct structures of movies that go in a certain direction. And then the other thing I was writing a lot that clearly comes from all of his movies, and the things that everyone loves about his movies, especially the movies he was writing in the 70s, are he was always kind of came with script doctor. I mean, the other famous sequence that is probably the most famous scene he's ever written is the Jaws scene, the Indianapolis scene in Jaws, where the three characters compare wounds, and then he describes the USS Indianapolis, the ship that delivers the bomb. And character is always what they would go to for him for script doctoring. And I tended to find that he's always embellishing with character. He emphasizes more than anybody else character entrances and their introductions and how they initially introduce themselves to an audience. Almost every character's introduction in this movie or in a lot of his other writings seem to be very broad, bold, but at the same time give you an instantaneous sense of character with him.
Um,
Does that seem? You're
yeah,
waffling a little on that.
yeah. I'm just trying to absorb it. I mean, so basically, but to get back to my question, did you like it?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Did you like it?
No, I did.
Yeah.
I mean,
Does it make sense though? What I'm trying to say, it's just I don't want to. I don't want. I really
the movie's free flowing. That's
yeah.
I think that's
I
the-
love and enjoy the film. Don't get me wrong. I really like this film, and I'd never get tired of it. But it just seems something's a little bit off on it. I want to maybe think. It's like Peter Jackson doing King Kong. He loved it so much he smothered it. He's so close to this. And he talks about it in the audio comment. I was listening to John's audio.
I do want to hear what came from the.
He just said he
You
was
watched
so
this.
he goes, oh, this is so personal. I can't even, almost can't watch it. And he's like, it's so. But the music.
The score was the thing that came across most.
Yeah,
This very sweeping, romantic,
very epic, very epic music.
especially for what's basically an intimate movie, an
Right,
autobiographical intimate movie.
Whereas like American Graffiti, it's funny. Well, there's a lot of humor in American Graffiti. There's not as much humor there. I mean, there's a lot of stabs. No, I got to take that back. There's Milius humor, and then there's Lucas humor. American Graffiti, you just enjoy it. And there's a little poignant scene with Wolfman Jack, but you don't get this heavy.
The thing I noticed most about the American Graffiti connection is that Big Wednesday is divided into 4 sections, and it's mainly in the first section, unless you want to combine somehow American Graffiti with more American Graffiti, which would have come out around this time. And I'm actually a pretty big fan for. I've only seen more American Graffiti the one time and found it very underrated. It's a very innovatively edited movie.
Well, see, of course, this whole time period here, I even the flawed ones, the good ones, the great ones, I love it all because it just brings back this exciting time of all these guys. Scorsese's going to be starting New York, and then the Last Waltz is going on, and Big Wednesday, he goes in the Apocalypse Now, so we don't know what George is going to happen,
I do want because before I dive into my other big take on the movie, what is it you love John Milius? You've been selling me on John Milius for as long as I've known you, as a filmmaker and as a writer. What do you love about him?
I think it's the romanticism and the epic. He's a man out of time. He loves, and he talks about the Bushido, the code of the samurai. He likes John Ford. He loves, he was working on an epic of Genghis Khan when he had the stroke. One thing I haven't seen, and I got him. I need to take some time for it. He did the Rome miniseries on Rome.
Oh, it's. I thought it was
2 seasons. It was 2 seasons.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking, I'm a big history buff, and when I saw Win the Lion, I thought, oh my gosh, this is just wonderful. And then I found out, he did uncredited work on Dirty Harry. He helped write Magnum Force. Judge Roy Bean's a fun film. I mean, it's got its problems. Jeremiah Johnson's pretty much, a flawless film in some ways for me. So I was really excited. Because he had this kind of, I know there's controversy that he's a right wing crazy conservative guy and all that stuff. But
that's actually probably a good segue into the other take I have on this, which, we've been talking about how personal Big Wednesday is, right?
Yes.
Which would mean that we need to talk about John Milius's personality.
Right.
A personality that, even though you said he gets short-shifted in things like Easy Rider, Raging Bulls, like
I don't know. It's been a while. Was he? He might have been.
No, he's big in it.
He's big in it. Yeah, in that book. But I'm
He's
just saying.
a big personality.
I'm thinking of the digital world now and social platforms and articles now. I think he gets over. I think he doesn't get in the pantheon anymore like he was at one time.
I guess, but we're talking about a man who is a partial basis of
John
John Goodman's character in The Big Lebowski. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking off the top of my head. He's got the character in Zeroville.
Yeah, and there's U.S. And also talk about he's part of the USC mafia. All the guys that came out of USC, and then the Coppola and his gang came out of UCLA, and that whole group of people, and Walter Murch and all that stuff.
We're definitely also going to talk about and recommend a great documentary on Amazon Prime about Milius called Milius, where that's also where we're getting a lot of our information too. But over the years, you've shown me your Milius love and kind of pushed him on. I have always pushed back with this teasing, this teasing of him being so right wing, and the thing that I've been thinking about a lot. But here's the thing: He's not really.
No,
Like,
no,
he's not.
it doesn't affect the movies. I mean,
No, I'm
yeah,
not. I mean, I'm talking just on a political stance.
yeah.
Like he's gotten this reputation that it comes across in the documentary. He was really big into a contrarian thing, and he loves the myth making aspect of it.
Yes.
And he started becoming contrarian because he's hugely in love with military history, which make him, and especially in the Vietnam War, pro war with Vietnam. And then he's also giantly loves his guns. He famously would have studio contracts to give him guns and cigars with a lot of the scripts he was writing.
Yeah, instead of money, they would deliver.
No, I think he got money too on that.
Well, he would deliver. They would deliver a collectible rifle to him in a limousine. Show up and here's your rifle, Mr. Milius. And he would have a big bear stuffed and all kinds of stuff in his office and guns sitting on the desk. And yeah.
So the philosophical contradictions were what always bugged me, just because like he describes himself as a Zen anarchist, is his inherent philosophy in life. But I in the documentary and a lot of stuff I've read around him, they also kind of describe him as like cartoony, just because like the movie that I've seen of his that in the documentary they describe as kind of destroying his career, and a movie I remember as a kid vaguely, my dad liking it, but when I saw it as an adult, I thought it was an absolute crock of shit, was Red Dawn. And the time it got really crushed because of it, even though it was a box office success, but being very, very jingoistic and very pro-military, and like even in the height of the Reagan years when that stuff should have been accepted.
But do you still don't like Red Dawn still?
The politics in that movie are pretty.
What are the politics? I mean, I don't know. Do we want to go into all this? I mean, to me, it's like, what would we do if we were invaded by Russia in our land? Would we not do guerrilla warfare?
Well, it's also what would we do if aliens invaded us? It's such a randomly hypothetical thing, and also there's such an odd sense of other with that scenario where like a land war in the middle of the 80s as opposed to a nuclear strike. Just it seems so bizarrely absurd, and also okay. Red Dawn was recently remade,
right?
And Milius had the quote because it was North Korea came to. North Korea's not going to have a land invasion against us. But the funny thing is, what Milius's quote about it was, if he were to do it now, he would make it Mexico.
I know, but again, he might just be doing that to stir the pot. Again, with John,
here's the thing about
you don't know that he's poking at you or he's really telling the truth.
Here's the thing about provocateurs and people who stir the pot. They stir the pot. The pot's stirred, and they have to deal with the repercussions of them stirring the pot.
Well, in Hollywood, you do. I mean, half the time.
Half the documentary is almost a tragedy of him not understanding the repercussions of all this myth making. Okay, the other big thing I wanted to talk about was that seemed apparent in Big Wednesday with the How Green Was My Valley is the John Ford influence, and
yes.
And it's a lovely thing. I, over the last few years, have really gone down a rabbit hole of John Ford. There's something about John Ford's filmmaking that's deeply appealing to me just because he seems like it's extremely sentimental. That's the thing that Big Wednesday and this carried. Like, there's a streak of sentimentality that goes through Big Wednesday. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I mean, and like it's when you start keeping that in mind when you watch it, it's like when Bear, the character of Bear, he makes surfboards in the movie. He's kind of the older surfer in the movie, kind of their mentor of the three boys that you follow. They're at a party at William Katz's house, and he sees them dancing. And the thing about Ford films is the rituals, all the rituals that the soldiers go through, and the dance sequences, and that's a very big thing with Ford. And
that's a good point.
So in Big Wednesday, the rituals are there, but we don't. It's hard to see them because it's so contemporary. But they're doing their parties. They're going down to Mexico for their little Mexico trip. They're doing their parties on the beach. All these things are rituals that surfers did.
That's a very good observation.
So that's what Ford. That's his Ford. That's the Ford.
Well, the big observation parallel I had between the two is that they're both obsessed with myth making.
Oh, and that obviously,
and unfortunately, self myth making. And the thing about John Ford that I found is politically is that I watch this stuff of his, and I find the values in the movie, if I had to give them a modern lens, would be absolutely junk values. But at the same time, they seem quaint because they seem so distant. And there's a part for me where Milius seems like a bridge between that period. I want to talk a little bit about the phenomenon of mainly actors from the 50s who, I'm thinking people like Jimmy Stewart or Sinatra or Henry Fonda and mainly Charlton Heston. People who were like robust, liberal activists in the 50s, even going into the 60s, and then turned to conservative politics later in life as the times changed. And how, in particular with Reagan, one of the things that really bugs me in terms of how Ford and also on to Milius is there's this feeling of that they present this machismo model, strong male leader, and there tends to be, especially with the cartoonishness of Milius, this unwillingness to acknowledge the damage or the repercussions of what they wrought. Like the title Apocalypse Now comes from this button that was around USC at the time that said Nirvana Now. And Milius thought it was funny to put an Apocalypse Now and then put a mushroom cloud in the middle of it. And he's just like, let's just blow the whole thing up. And that's a funny, nihilistic way of looking at things, right?
Yeah.
But it's not a serious way of looking at it. But there's repercussions of when like actors start to actually buy this stuff and like start to buy the reputation that this manliness is the thing that's going to lead us all through whatever storms we're going to face.
Yeah, well, I mean, politics and cinema and storytelling is, I don't know, I don't know how to handle that as well, because I am certainly not ultra conservative, and I'm certainly not, I don't own a gun. I'm very, lack of a better word, a big weenie, and so in many ways as a man. But I love these robust romantic films because that's, you know, the history. And I at the end of the, so I guess the takeaway, I mean, I guess what you're discussing here is, do we just, eradicate machismo in movies because it's bad, or fascist characters because of it'll get into our policy and subconscious into reality or some, I don't know. Movies are escape. That's the whole, one aspect of movies is that when I was a little kid, I played with Army soldiers. Now, is it politically incorrect to play with Army soldiers as a kid now? What are they doing on these video games? They're so violent.
Let's not go in the term of politically incorrect. I'm saying more in terms of there's repercussions of these images being pushed down to people over and over and over again, and especially when these people become thought leaders, that there's a danger in actually buying some of the like Milius. Milius, a lot of his jingoism rhetoric comes from a love of militarism, and just he's a fast, as you mentioned,
he was disappointed he didn't get into Vietnam because of his asthma.
Right,
he was turned down.
I'm trying to remember what movie. I keep thinking of Thin Red Line, but there's Nick Nolte in Thin Red Line? He keeps saying I should have died in this war. Who am I thinking of? That was like, I didn't get my war. There was some big movie.
Yeah, I forget which movie that is.
But that's what buys me. Where it's just like, I love war, but I'm never going to go to war. And the thing I keep coming across, maybe you know more about this. Milius talks about these great moments and great situations where men are tried and brought to trial, and he talks a lot about violence, and is there a significant violent moment in his life?
No, he did some hunting out when he was in Colorado at school there.
And there's a funny thing about the Jeremiah Johnson screenplay where supposedly one of the things that got written out of it was he called it live or eating Jeremiah Johnson, because his whole thing with hunting was that you need to see through the repercussions of
the animal dying.
Yes, you actually had to face the animal that you killed.
And Tarantino talked about going on a duck hunting with him.
I haven't heard. I vaguely.
That interview just recently on Alamo Drive and New Beverly. He did an interview with Milius.
What was the story?
He actually went out duck hunting with him, Zemeckis, Spielberg, and Milius, and he said they just sat there all day smoking cigars and drinking and they shooting at ducktails or something like that.
Well, I mean, hunting is one thing, and
no, I don't know if he's ever had a moment. It's the romanticism of it, and again, are we supposed to damn the romanticism of war? I mean, I was even if you read Bob Dylan's memoirs,
we got to Dylan. We took a long walk to
I
get to
guess
Dylan.
Apropos, Dylan said he wanted to go to West Point. He wanted to be, and in fact, one of the songs just recently on his new album, he mentions General Patton paving the way for Presley, and I'm like, Okay, Patton. Oh, that's
Well, I'm not damning someone for pro-military views. I'm talking specifically about his views on Vietnam and the Russians at the height of Reaganism.
well, yeah, Red Dawn. Getting back, I mean, I remember enjoying Red Dawn. I might be rode out on a rail for saying that.
I think you're going to have way more supporters than I am actually on this.
Well, if your kids of a certain age love Red Dawn,
In theory, I should be someone who loves it because I was raised on it.
yeah, but yeah, I know other guys that just they could quote it. It's like one of those films they quote, like they quote Adam Sandler films a certain generation. But yeah, that the whole fascist aspect.
Oh, I did want to say one thing about Big Wednesday real quickly. I did see, I think it was Janet Maslin gave him a bad review because at this time he had such a reputation of violence, and Big Wednesday has very innocent fighting in it,
Yeah.
and so she slighted him for it.
Getting back to the movie, getting back to Big Wednesday.
Back to the movie.
Well, yeah, just back. Let's getting to some of the fun aspect of the movie. Is what it cast. I mean, I was looking at the cast, and it's like, first of all, I love Milius' stock company.
I recognize Bear, but it seems like he was mostly a TV actor.
Yeah, he's a TV actor. Gary Lopez, who's an actual surfer, and he's actually playing himself in the movie. He's like the new breed of surfers near the end of the film. He goes on to be in Conan. He's one of Conan's sidekicks or something.
The one person I noted is he had like 2 shots, but he's high in the credits, is Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund.
And he's the narrator.
He's the narrator?
I was bugging me this, I'm like, who is narrating this thing? Who's narrating this thing? And
why isn't William Katt the narrator?
I don't know. Maybe it's supposed to be Barlow, but they actually read. I was trying to find the credit. The only credit I could find was it's Robert Englund.
That's interesting. William Katt was the most notable performance to me, and the thing, like, trying to come at this movie in good faith, so blonde, so bleach blonde. Like
surfers.
If I wasn't being so good faith about this, I would call it Aryan blonde. It was so.
Do you know any brunette? Well, Gary Lopez is brunette, brown hair.
And to be fair, like compared to William Katt, like Jane Michael Vincent's a brunette in this movie.
Well, let's talk about the 3 leads before I start getting more back in the company again. It's interesting. Jane Michael Vincent is such a weird career and interesting person to study. And I don't know. I never thought he got to become a good actor.
Yeah, because I knew him as a kid on Airwolf, and I was looking up his Wikipedia article right before you came up here, and they were trying to say Airwolf was the biggest thing he's known for.
But no, the world's greatest athlete, Walt Disney. If you were a certain age,
Hey,
if you were my age, it's the world's greatest athlete.
That's not what the Wikipedia article said, and I don't know if you know, but the internet's right on everything, Todd.
No, he spanned a couple different generations.
I saw he was in some movies with John Wayne, even.
Yeah, I think I can't remember what Undefeated maybe. I think with Rock Hudson. Anyway, he was so good looking, and he was in all these really interesting films. But he could surf. Kat and Jane Michael Vincent were actual surfers, and so you get to see them actually.
That is definitely one of the pluses of the movies. Is the surfing feels real.
Yeah, and their doubles are really done well. And Bruce Surtees, Mr. Clint Eastwood cinematographer, is the cinematographer on it, and they really did a good job. If you're watching, you don't think, oh, that's where they switched out Kat or switched out.
I was paying attention to it.
So Jane Michael Vincent's kind of. He's stiff. He's never did loosen up as a really good actor, I think. I mean, even though he's in movies that I enjoy, and I enjoy him actually on a certain level. But here he is on one side. He's got William Katt. Katt's a good actor.
I know him mostly from Carrie.
Carrie, yeah, and he's coming off of Carrie, and he could have been Luke Skywalker if he had.
He was the greatest American hero too.
Yeah, the greatest American hero on TV. That was kind of a big thing for him. But then you got Gary Busey on the other side, and he's not a surfer, and he was out of shape. He had to get in shape, and he's the masochist is his name, and he's just John just let him go. I mean, he just let him loose. And
was it? I don't remember if it was one of the Tarantino essays I was reading on it, but wasn't Busey considered like the method actor of his generation for a few years?
Well, when he saw Buddy Holly, we all just thought, wow, and he was just so. But he's like, I guess maybe he's this. He's like the predecessor to Crispin Glover, He's just
well,
maybe not that bad. Well, I don't know.
No, that fits just because, and especially because Busey has much more notorious later half. But.
Yeah. So, and I have to say, there's one scene worth the price of admission. Is Joe Spinell shows up in The Big Wednesday. Joe, if you know your Godfathers, Rocky, and some of Joe's B movies. He is,
You know what? Honestly, I had trouble. I remember seeing him. I was just like, where do I know him from?
and he so when they're the three of them, William Catt. You'll see how they all three react to the draft. They all get drafted. They have to go to the draft
With two other friends too.
And the other, yeah, there's a second layer of friends that you get to kind of know. One of them you'll know as Red Brown, who's the TV Captain America. He's the big bruiser that comes down and
Did not put that together. Okay,
yeah,
wow.
That's the TV movie Captain America.
The blondness really came to me in that sequence where the first fight in that house because they were all blonde.
And the guy who comes in and starts the fight, that's part of the Miami Vice cast. Michael Talbot. Remember there was like the Crockett and Tubbs. Remember there were two other guys that were kind of like they played off of the other team in Miami Vice, the kind of like the second-rate team.
I'm more of a Miami Vice movie guy, Ted.
Oh, okay. But Michael Talbot, that's that. When he walks in, I go, oh yeah, it's Miami Vice guy. So anyway, Gary's his character decides he's just going to play absolutely crazy, which he is already crazy to a certain regard, but he's going to make himself even crazier. So they have him go into a crazy lit room with Joe Spinell. And I love on the audio commentary. I laughed out loud when Milius said this. It was like
there's a funny cigarette gag that we don't want to completely spoil.
So there's like Gary sitting in a chair, separate, socially distanced from the desk of Joe Spinell, and Spinell and it's Spinell without a mustache, which is really weird. He usually has that pencil thin mustache, and he keeps on asking for a cigarette. And he drops it, and he asks for another, and he's trying to take the lighter.
We are going to spoil this.
Yeah, I know, but you need to watch the scene. But I love what Milius says. He goes, "Is a duel to the death." And you think about because I hear Spinell was a character too in real life. So to put Spinell and Busy in the same room and just let him go, and it sounds like Milius just let him go and just kind of wing it, and it's a wonderful little scene.
The tragedy of me really harping on Milius's politics when they don't really matter, especially they seem like they're more of a performance art, is that everyone Spielberg most notably talk about how full of life Milius is, and that does come through in the movie. There's just
so it was funny. I was going through here Jeffrey Lewis is he's in Dillinger and Win the Lion, and Rough Riders is a TV miniseries.
Have you seen that?
A long time ago, and Brian Keith plays Teddy Roosevelt, and Brian Keith plays Teddy Roosevelt in The Win the Lion.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, you've seen that. Have you seen, was it Flight of the Intruder?
That's the one I have not seen, I'm embarrassed to say. Of all his feature films, I have not seen Flight of the Intruder. I have a copy of it, I just haven't got around to it. But
I haven't seen, as I mentioned earlier, I haven't seen it.
And it sounds like it's more like work for hire, because you get to play with, it's an army movie, or, military movie, but he didn't write it, I don't think. Which is interesting. Here's here's the really interesting things. Like when William Katz goes back to see his girlfriend when he gets back from Vietnam. Well, the person he encounters at the door, that's Steve Canale. He's in Judge Roy Bean and Dillinger, Win the Lion, and Big Wednesday. Roy Jensen is a stock company. Oh, I love, this is kind of my Frank McRae, the big black guy. Who remember he's in the draft sequence, the military. He's barking out the orders.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
He's in Dillinger. He's in 1941. He's in Red Dawn. One of my favorite. One of the sequences I like in Red Dawn.
He's got a very distinct voice.
He's a history teacher. He's the teacher that walks out to the playground when the Russians are landing in the playground and gets shot.
They had I didn't rewatch Red Dawn for this, but in Milius they had the trailer, which was kind of a cool trailer, and that sequence is in there.
And he's also got a major part in Farewell to the King, a later date Milius film. Harry Dean Stanton is in several films of his. He's got a stuntman who plays parts and plays other stunt parts and uncredited parts. Terry Leonard, if you're a credit watcher, that's a very familiar name. I talked about Gary Lopez, the real surfer. He's in Conan and Farewell to the King. Perry Lang, that's a little sequence at the beginning of Big Wednesday. They come down, it opens up, and J. Michael Vincent is inebriated, and he's got a hangover. And
I didn't know the movie's bookended by those steps.
Yeah,
or him,
the gate.
Him coming down the steps.
The ruin, and the gates represent like ancient civilization. I mean, Perry Lang is in 1941. I think he's part of the Big Red One movie too, group. But he's the guy he won't loan. Gary's trying to get a surfboard from him, and Gary he grabs him and does. You can tell it's just improvising. He's like shaking him. That's Perry Lang, and he's in some Milius stuff. Ben Johnson is in a couple of Milius films. Gary and William Katt came back for Rough Riders way later in Milius's career. He actually brought him back.
I'm really having trouble because William Katt's working right now, and I'm having trouble imagining. Like, I mean, I've seen modern interviews with him, but I'm having trouble picturing what he looks like now. Besides, like, his blonde hair is now very silvery.
Yeah, it's so funny about Katt. I always thought that Katt and Tom Berenger, Butch and Sundance, the early days, a Richard Lester film, I always thought their careers never really took off to major starring roles, but they.
Berenger's almost did with Platoon, though.
That's probably his biggest foray.
Because I always had this feeling that Berenger was a respected actor. I mean, maybe, but
no, he is. I think Katt to a certain extent, but in Katt just it started to taper off after Carrie. Once he hit with Carrie, he was kind of a hot commodity, but then he kind of tapered off, and then you got the world's greatest athlete, and then I think after that, it's whatever he can grab. But so there's that's the one thing about John Ford. Going back to the Ford connection, really has quickly developed a stock company in front of the camera and behind the camera, which Ford was a big proponent of. I think it seems like when they talk about stock companies, it's always Ford is always brought up, but I mean most directors do that if you really start examining them.
Yeah. I mean, in so much, I think it's more of a measure of how consistently people make movies, not so much whether or not. Because like when you look at someone like Milius, his stock can remember just because after Red Dawn, he hasn't significantly been able to make movies.
Right. Well, he came back. He was going to do the Affair with the King, and that's 1989. That was going to be a giant David Lean epic. I thought it was going to be a return to Win the Lion level of artistry, but it just fell on its face. It just didn't work. Nick Nolte at the time was still a box office draw, but it just didn't. It was, I don't know if it was in the editing or I have to go back and see it again. But it just, it was supposed to, it was going to be, I'm sure the talk before it and the pre-production and the production, it was going, this is going to be a giant big epic, David Lean, another Milius epic, and it just didn't form. Yeah, going back to Milius' love of history and races and Bushido and the Romanticism, there's this like ancient gate that bookends the Big Wednesday, and it's like that's the way the surfers come and go through at least these three main surfers that you follow, and they're like royalty. They're part of the King Arthur's court. And there will come a time where you see that one of the surfboard becomes Excalibur, and the Excalibur gets passed along, and there's a sequence where the three of them they reunite to do this royal walk, and it's very Arthurian, and the music is great, and that's where the film you get these little bits in these films in this film. It's so wonderful. And the music, everything just comes together, but it's so loosey-goosey that I guess that's my. But
so is Milius' other movies not this loose?
I think that to me, The Win the Lion is very structured. Dillinger feels like an AIP film, which it wasn't. It was an AIP film, and then Conan. We haven't even talked about Conan the Barbarian really. And that was a big hit for him, And
that was like the front half of that structured.
Yeah. So, but this one, like I said, it was so personal, and I think he got so, I think a lot of times the director gets so personal, they don't see what they're doing. Sometimes they get so swallowed up in the
but making. You brought up American Graffiti. American Graffiti is a movie that like
George is a little. He's an exception. I don't know. I would keep on thinking of Peter Jackson with King Kong. And I think what else? There's a few others.
Which, by the way, we've talked about this. I'm a huge fan of Peter Jackson's King Kong, even though it doesn't need to be 3 hours.
But yeah, there's also there's a certain couple things that remind me of the Wild Bunch, and he's kind of got a Wild Bunch sort of ending in One the Lion. So he's very enamored of the Wild Bunch, and it's the men. And the walk and certain things like that. So there's that going for it, which is really interesting.
I think here's where what it nails down to is the positives of him celebrating some of these things sometimes get seen by someone like me as at the detriment of somebody else. Does that make sense? Is that unfair?
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Like men are men because women are less. And I mean, like, this movie's not a good example of it just because the movie's about the three guys. And so
Well, no, Lee Pacelle, his Jen Michael Vincent, who he eventually marries in the movie, she goes,
she's a great performance, but she doesn't have anything written for her except
no, but her, what little bit of character we get, she's a pretty strong character.
after the first part. No,
Well, she's gone. I mean, it's just,
she's gone for the rest of it. She's
Yeah.
like she's the dutiful mother to the alcoholic baby daddy.
well, if you're gonna, yeah, I didn't want to if we want to give that away or not, but
That you gave
oh,
away
we're past the spoiler thing.
You gave away the cigarette stuff, but I can't give away something that
Oh
happens.
no, we're
30 minutes
past the spoiler border boundary, aren't we? She gets pregnant, and they're like, oh, you're gonna keep the baby, and and you want to hook
and she then takes a swig of beer after saying yes.
well, yeah, that's the
Different time.
That's 60s, yeah. Speaking of the Mexico sequence, you did see the John Milius cameo, right?
Yes. Oh yes, marijuana.
He does cameos in a lot of his films.
Well, so I do have to give credit where a lot of the messiness, like most of modern people, I think, will see it in one of Milius's biggest fans is Quentin Tarantino. He says that Judge Roy Bean is one of the most readable, best screenplays he's ever read in his life, and especially movies like Hateful Eight, maybe a little bit Inglourious Basterds. There's a giant amount of moral ambiguity to the big moments, usually the big violent moments that really seems to come from Milius. And it's in here, since this movie's not that violent, the moral ambiguity is things about friendship. It's about letting
loyalty,
big moments pass by.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought Tarantino up because who did he name drop when he got his Oscar at the Oscars?
John Milius.
Yeah, I don't understand.
We had a long conversation about how he.
If I ever get to meet Quentin, I want to ask him, why did you? Do you always call him John Milius? But that actually, my cinema chat show, I was still on the air at the time. Pandemics kind of put me on the sidelines. But I did a little tribute to Milius and Robert Bolt, which Milius is a big fan of Robert Bolt, who did Lawrence of Arabia.
That was the lineage Tarantino put, right? That he said Robert Bolt, writer of Lawrence of Arabia, was
Men of All Seasons, just a great screenwriter.
Was Milius' favorite screenwriter, and it's weird because screenwriters have all these different benchmarks, but some screenwriters really give Milius as a benchmark of.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because if I recall this correctly, and you might comment on this if you it seems like I think Milius talks about how he would say he would give the price of a screenplay for this amount of money if he let me direct it.
George Roy Bean was the one specifically.
And then he said no, and then he got a bunch
he had two different prices for if you wanted to buy it without him directing it, and if a lower price if you wanted to buy it with him directing.
So he ends up being one of the. I remember when I started getting into movies and found kind of following the industry, he was like the big financial barrier he broke as a screenwriter. He was like the highest. He hit one of the boundaries, and then later on it was like Joe Esterhaus and Shane Black.
Yeah,
but it was a big deal because I guess screenwriters were tapped down for a long time.
Well, and in Milius's case, the problem with a lot of screenwriters getting taken down was when they did finally sell their stuff, the movies were changed and they always hated the final product. And Milius seems to fit that mold where it's not so much he hated the stuff because he would say percentages like 70% of the movie was what he'd written things. Because George Roy Bean is directed by John Huston, who is a great screenwriter in his own right.
And funny thing was they argued on the set, and then Huston would have John write scenes that John didn't really want to write. But anyway, John hung in there, and even though he didn't like the result of the movie, but guess what? He hires John Huston for a major part in Win the Lion. In other words, he says it's like you go through the training with your DI, and then you like him afterwards, and you so you're a drill instructor, and so he put John Huston in the Win the Lion. Here's another thing, but going to some of your things about Ford and political subtext and how he says on the audio commentary, he himself says, I like sentimentality. So,
no, I like sentimentality too. I think especially someone like Milius, the credit you have to give Milius is that he's a very literary, muscular writer. and I mean, the sentimentality is earned with a lot of character details.
Some other cool things about this is just a lot of really fun tidbits. Barbara Hale is in the movie. She's William Katz's real mother. She was in Perry. She was
Wait, she's his real mother?
his real mother. She's that's sitting up there reading Catch-22 as that party's going on.
That was a funny detail to me for some reason. I have this little pet peeve when people read in movies that Milius fixes. I hate when people read in movies. They're always at the beginning of a book, and she's at the end of Catch-22.
Okay, good observation there. I didn't even notice that part. But yeah, that's William Katz's real mother, and so that added an interesting layer. And that she was in Perry. Most people know her from Perry Mason.
What is she in Perry Mason? I've had a fascination with Perry Mason recently, just because I finished the HBO show.
Oh well, I lack for a better word. I'm not a real aficionado on the original. I grew up with in the background. She's the secretary, I think. His secretary.
Okay. There's a character in the new HBO version.
That's who she is. I'm pretty sure. I'm sure my audience correct me if I'm wrong out there, my listening audience. Another character actor I thought was interesting that shows up in it is Fran Ryan, the lady, the kind of the gruff lady that owns the restaurant.
Yeah.
And she shows up later at the wedding, shushing him.
Oh, I forgot she was at the wedding.
Yeah. By the way, the bear who's getting married, Sam Melville, his wife is Milius' second wife.
Because a lot of commentary in the documentary was how Bear is based off Milius himself.
Yeah, true, very true. And then she, if you know, you'll recognize Fran Ryan right away. She always she was Jesse James' stepmother in The Long Riders. That's how she made a big impact on me in that movie. But she's similar to Marjorie Main. And if a whole different generation before me grew up watching Marjorie Main, it's kind of this gruff woman. Stern at times, but also playing Mom Paul Kettle. She was Maul Kettle. So when Fran Ryan came along, a lot of directors used her in those kind of roles, a really stern mother, or the you kids behave yourself, or I'm gonna kick you out the door and stuff like that. So that's kind of fun to see her in that. So there's a lot of don't get us wrong, and I'm glad to hear Shane liked it a lot because but. I think I always hear this. I don't know how true it is for all these films. You always hear it now has a following. It got an afterlife on cable, HBO, V8 video.
The big reason I wanted to watch it was I missed it playing at the Austin Film Festival a few years ago, which is a notable screenwriting festival.
Wasn't John there? They bring John in?
I think it was a period where it was a post-stroke, so they originally wanted him to be there and he couldn't.
I think I saw a video of him and Oliver Stone together on the stage talking about war on films.
That sounds about right.
And that was in Austin, I think.
Maybe he was there and I just missed him. But the one thing I did want to end on is so I brought all this political stuff up.
Yeah. I mean, it's politics is just it's just scary. It's scary.
Yeah,
and I'm glad. I mean, you're much more braver than I am.
And the thing is, I keep imagining the limited audience we have right now. I know certain people who might have just turned it off right now because we're in an election year right now. A lot of political talk. The problem with a lot of it is that you turn your ears off halfway through the sentence because you think you know what people are going to say. And especially right now with things as divisive as it is, like there's this tendency to dismiss a person based on their politics, which I got to be honest, I'm guilty of when it comes to Milius. And I've been guilty of it. And the documentary, which I recommend, again, is on Amazon Prime, is a very touching document. And the Milius, basically, as we've mentioned several points, as a born storyteller, suffered a stroke around 2010, and it left him unable to speak for a while. And I'm spoiling this, but there's a really touching moment in the doc where Spielberg almost tears up talking about it. And he says, nothing worse can happen than a born raconteur like John Milius not being able to talk. And he says, nothing worse has happened to any of my friends than that. And I kind of wanted to end on a positive note that doc came out in 2013, and there was some footage towards the end of it closer to that date. Milius, as far as I can heard, is back to speaking, and he's in public speaking. I wanted to end on a positive note, but the one place I saw that he did speak at and talk at was Jan Michael Vincent's funeral.
And then they posted this picture, came up on some social platforms, a picture of him with Paul Schrader and Walter Hill, the three of them,
really?
buddy, yeah. And that's a very interesting connection because he was executive producer on Paul Schrader's Hardcore, and he was Geronimo. He wrote a screenplay for Walter Hill's Geronimo movie.
There is
And Extreme Prejudice, which is we didn't even talk about some of the screenplays.
I did want to. We should talk about Extreme Prejudice then,
Well, I mean,
because that was something he was going to do.
right. Oh, and also, by the way, I keep on looking at all these different random notes I have. He claims in the audio commentary that Big Wednesday was going to be a novel originally.
Well, I mean, structurally that fits, doesn't it?
Right. And then he turned it into a movie. Extreme Prejudice, yeah, he was going to do Extreme Prejudice back at this time period, and they got sidelined, and it finally got resurrected by Walter Hill. And I thought, I remember going to the theater to see it, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be, lack of a better word, testosterone heaven, because it's going to be Walter Hill and John Milius together.
Nice.
And you got Jerry Goldsmith's score, and you got Ry Cooder doing the Mexican music, the south of the border. Powers Booth, Nick Nolte looking trim and lean and mean. Rip Torn in a wonderful performance. I'm wondering if Rip's dialogue was the dialogue between the two Texas Rangers. That's what they're playing, Rip Torn and Nick Nolte with big hats. They're the very archetypal Texas Rangers. In fact, that's another movie script he did with what's his name from Darson's Creek,
which he supposedly almost thought Eastwood could have been played in.
Oh no, I wanted to see him direct the Texas Rangers. Anyway, the Extreme Prejudice. I think I was just so hyped up by it. I was a little let down by it, but now I love it. I go back to it and watch it. It's a weird mesh of post-Watergate conspiracy type secret government operations. Meshing with Old Cowboy, a Western movie, and it once again it ends up being another Wild Bunch ending in a way. So there's something about the Win the Line, Big Wednesday, a lot of them they have that kind of they kind of dovetail into a kind of a big Wild Bunch. I guess we can't stress how much Wild Bunch was such a pivotal film for everybody.
The Milius movie I wanted to see, which I don't know if he was going to direct it, but the Wachowski brothers were producing a. He imagined Conan as a trilogy at a certain point, but didn't get to the second one. But years later, he was going to do a King Conan that the Wachowskis weren't going to produce.
Yeah.
It was going to bring late Arnold back as an older Conan as King.
Right, which we got teased in the first film, the very end where you see him sitting on the throne as the king with Schwarzenegger's got a beard and everything, and you go, oh, wow, He did a Miami Vice script. He did a TV movie called Motorcycle Gang. It was all these little riffs on AIP titles. It was Roger Corman title films, and I think Jake Busey's in that. And it's called Motorcycle Gang.
When was that?
That would have been like in the early 90s. It was like Showtime. It's a Showtime series or an HBO series. And Rodriguez did an episode, and Milius did an episode, and Road Racers and Motorcycle Gang. And they were all riffing off these titles from these old classic AIP titles. And of course, we mentioned Rome. He did an episode, one of the later day Twilight Zone series. He did a Miami Vice episode.
He directed that Twilight Zone episode, didn't he?
I don't know if he did. I got it down here. Well, maybe he did, because I didn't really, on my notes, I didn't make the case. I also like the fact that, along with Spielberg, he was a big mentor to Zemeckis and Gale.
I've mentioned this in another podcast. I want to find the earliest draft of 1941, which before Milius took it over.
But I want to hold your hand and Use Cars. He's the executive producer on Zemeckis and Gale's first two directing films.
And I got to give credit where credit's due. The anarchic spirit, especially with Used Cars, that's such a cynical movie. That's so fun how cynical it is.
Yeah.
That's a Milius touch you can kind of feel.
Right, and then
or influence.
And then 1941, which is 1941 is just such a huge carnival.
I think the appropriate response to 1941 is, but we're just talking about it. I kind of want to see it again.
I know. I can endlessly watch it. I mean, that's the crazy thing. I can't defend it, but it's such over the hill. It kind of reminds me of the David Niven Casino Royale from the late '60s.
Oh, that's way more of a mess.
John Huston's in that directing a segment.
John Huston, every director on that movie directed 45 seconds.
Yeah. So, but some of these giant messes that appeal to me. And 41's obviously one of those. Yeah, there's a lot of Milius wackiness that's infiltrated into it with Zemeckis and Gale and Spielberg and all kinds of interesting things. But yeah, Milius is just. I would tell you folks that I mean, I guess like Shane said, I guess I've been bugging about Milius. There's just a lot of fun stuff in Milius. And the politics, it's just really interesting because, like I said, I Red Dawn I enjoy. I mean, what do you do with Dirty Harry? Pauline Kelly said it's a fascist.
I think something like Dirty Harry.
Do you and especially this days and age of the police force being under criticism,
There's a way of looking at it in a modern lens where, I don't know, maybe I'm being too forgiving of it. Like, there's a modern lens where you think the movie is questioning it, but I guess Dirty Harry's not that way at all.
I mean, he had the funny thing was that Dirty Harry was so successful that he got Milius along with Michael Cimino, to make even a more fascist group that Harry goes up against and try to out-fascist Dirty Harry, because they make Harry look a little bit more better in terms of
Eastwood's another big obvious hero of yours, and he's someone that I tease you about, where this also falls in that problem.
Talking to chairs.
Well, it's not even that. It's just this like idea of buying the idea of just the machismo leading indecisiveness, and that it's just all these other things you're worrying about are just, don't worry about them. They're tiny little things, and just because these actors buy their own performances.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, does a movie like Red Dawn, does a movie like Magnum Force, do these movies, Clockwork Orange or Straw Dogs, or do these really?
Wow, you dropped two into there. Two of these things are not like two of the others. I mean, they're both fascist movies, but they're different in that.
Well, I mean, do these really affect people's thinking and minds? Or can we just say, this is a way to live that out vicariously and not have it in our life?
I mean, I think there's a legitimate argument to be made about some movies like Dirty Harry or just the way guns are portrayed in movies. That this idea that America is a gun culture, like it's fostered by the way they're portrayed in movies, how they're like easy to use and they solve every problem.
Well, I mean, I still, I love action movies. I grew up on cowboy movies.
I do. And then okay, let me put it this way. There was a movie I watched recently on Netflix, The Old Guard, and it's a very gun-heavy movie.
Based on a comic book.
Yeah, a Greg Rucka comic book. I had a big problem with it because of how guns were solving everything in the movie. And it wasn't because the movie had guns in it and had action sequences based on a gun. It was so self-serious with all the guns, and the guns solved everything. It was so dramatic and weighty, but the guns were
Might is right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what do you do? I mean, I'm gonna really get off my lawn, kids, moment here. But it's like, did you ever play Grand Theft Auto?
Yeah.
Did you like Grand Theft Auto?
I mean, I played it.
What is the purpose of Grand Theft Auto? What is the mission statement of the game?
I played a lot of the free roam thing, where I think at one point I grabbed a rifle and started shooting somebody in the head. But.
See, I mean, I look at that. I'm just like, am I supposed to get up? I just toss around my head.
And I feel like such a schoolmarm for doing the what movies cause violence. And everyone's perceptible, but at the same time, clearly everyone loves guns without not really using them. It feels like.
But another big influence and fan that Milius is of is Sergio Leone, and.
So we got to Dylan and Leone. Is there a B coming up?
There can be, because I think Warren was actually, what was he up for? He was up for a part.
I really wasn't asking.
Anyway, Betty was up for something, but it didn't work out. What was I going to say? Leone. I love those films, and maybe because at the time they thought they were very violent. Now they're just so tame. They're almost art films in a way, in a weird way. And the gunfight is really just over with real quick. It's the build up. And the cinematic artistry of having with editing and music and everything to play with that, and it's just how do you handle all this stuff, because it just now. So I don't know. It's just weird. But I remember Red Dawn. I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. It's kind of like.
There's a difference between presenting violence is solving solutions and presenting violence as a visceral thrill. Or and I mean I keep wanting to bring the Tarantino argument to it that like he says every single viewer knows this is fictional, and and I just don't 100% agree with him on that.
That's interesting to say because you go back to Shakespeare, you go back to the Bible.
I'm not saying art is responsible for people's actions. Like don't peg me as
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying what. I mean, I'm not pegging you. I'm just trying to say, how do you handle violence? And then Quentin says he has no problem. It's part of storytelling.
Well, I think it's just there's something to be said about like Tarantino's violence. Like you see people suffer from it. Like the two gunshots I think are the best gunshots in cinema history are Steve Martin getting shot in the knee in Grand Canyon and the bullets in Three Kings, where you see what happens to the inside of it. The thing of it's like this romanticized idea of guns with actors who are trained to shoot blanks and that they just killing bad guys willy-nilly and just solving plot problems with it's like punching someone in the face. It's just like making someone go away, a bad person go away.
What do you think? What do you think about the ending, the violent ending in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
It makes me laugh every time.
Because it's so over the top and cartoony. But it's like
well, I watched it recently with someone that didn't laugh, and I just kept thinking in my head like, you got to keep in mind if he doesn't throw that can of dog food at her nose, they're going to rip a baby out of someone's stomach here in a second.
Well, I don't know. That's the weird thing. If you're thinking about it on different layers, it goes. This is our artistic comeback at the violence that was so unimaginable in reality, and that.
Look, let me put it this way. I am never going to ever say that an artist shouldn't use violence. I'm not even going to say an artist shouldn't use guns. I just don't like the reliance on Hollywood as guns as a plot device just to solve problems. And then not, especially as we're talking about Milius here, a man who's been, he thinks he's been blacklisted, even though some people try to say he wasn't. A system that is so full of groupthink and liberal way of thinking, but at the same time, when it comes to guns, they're the ones that are perpetuating this way more than anybody else. I mean, there's an argument to be made right now that the gun industry is being propped up by Walking Dead and people buying guns to fight off the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, apparently, Milius and Charlton Heston, NRA members,
yeah,
they actually stopped an overtake of a militia movement in the NRA. They actually teamed up together and stopped it.
What happened?
I guess this one faction was going to try and take over the NRA in terms of a militia type aspect of a group, and the two of them stopped it.
Well, I mean, again, this is. I keep thinking of Charlton Heston's. I think it's got to be his last cinema appearance. Is the saddest one. Where, yeah, Bowling for Columbine, where he's just kind of Michael Moore. Just gang rushes him and just catches him unawares, and again, Charlton Heston was a giant political force.
Well, there's these wonderful pictures of
I think
civil rights protesting on the Lincoln Memorial, and you see Heston side by side with Brando and Belafonte, and it's really interesting.
I can't remember where I read it, but someone was talking about that Heston probably until his dying day thought that his gun right advocacy was a fight for freedom and liberty, and that he still considered himself a bleeding heart liberal.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's politics. Woo, yeah, but no, I really, it's if that scares you. I mean, Big Wednesday's a lot of fun. It's just a coming of age film. I mean, there's some fist fights, but it's more of a macho surfer dudes.
Yeah, and This gets to the question, which I think is more my problem as a viewer than someone watching this movie normal, is just the baggage that comes with it. And I think I want to give credit where credit's due, or blame where blame's due. That Milius making himself a larger-than-life personality and making a personal movie, you have to read some of his personality to this. But all that being said, this is a fun movie, a nostalgic movie, a romantic movie, a very sentimental movie about friends keep wandering in and out of each other's lives.
Right.
Like,
Do you think if somebody coming into this that has no clue about Milius at all would enjoy this film?
The sad thing is, the emphasis over our conversations in the years, you emphasizing Milius. I've always thought you emphasize him more than anyone else. He was the movie brat that, like you said, maybe isn't considered should be in that pantheon anymore.
Right.
So I think the majority of people watching this are going to have that reaction.
Well, yeah. So, but don't you think that, and they're going to enjoy it?
Yeah.
They will enjoy it,
No.
especially not knowing the baggage.
Right. They will. They will enjoy this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun, and I should name it the composer's name, Basil.
Basil Paziodouris.
Yeah, he was
a USC person too. I recently saw I think it was Paul Verhoeven's first movie, which he scored, and that's a great score too.
Yeah, and this is his first film score. Soundtrack.
This is his first score?
Yeah, first film score. Yeah, a feature film score.
Cool.
I mean, he hits the ground running, and then with Conan. I want to say this kind of what I was reading about him a little bit today. It makes me think that, in some ways, the sound of soundtracks was influenced around the time of this Conan soundtrack. In terms of, like, when along came Horner and then we talked about
this is a very Horner score. That's the fascinating. It's James Horner before Horner.
And Elfman, comes in and defines the superhero film. Polidorus is kind of the big Verhoeven and Milius films. So you kind of define that era a little bit.
There's a really touching moment at the end of the Milius documentary where, when in the throes of after a stroke, Milius' son is a big interview subject in the movie, and Milius can't talk, and they don't even know if he's going to even respond to anything. One of the first things the son does to get Milius to respond that works is playing the Conan theme.
Dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
Also, here's another thing. Just a real side note. This is just I wanted to throw this in because I've been obsessed with. At the time, like I said, like going back to at 78, 79, 80, I was so obsessed with the movie brats, the whole era, and all of them, De Palma and Lucas, everybody. And so I was starting to get more aware of different cuts. Apparently, when it went to cable, when it went to HBO or something, I don't know where I read this, but he trimmed it, or he did a different cut for the cable, and I don't know what version is on the home video. I assume it's the HBO or Showtime, whatever he did when he cut it when it went to home video.
We're talking about Conan, right?
No, Big Wednesday, and then make it even more complicated. I used to again, excuse me. Some of my viewers, listeners, I used to, Playboy magazine would have every once a year, I think near the end of the year in December or November, Sex in the Cinema, and it was always, they would always highlight.
I grew up with that too.
Yeah, and I was always seeing, what sex scenes are in movies every year, and they had Big Wednesday in there, and they had Patty d'Arbanville, which is William Katt's girlfriend, had William Katt and Patty d'Arbanville making out on the beach. And it looked like there was some nudity or something. And I'm like, that's not in the movie.
Yeah,
and then I'm looking at my CD today, and I'm looking at the booklet. There's another scene of Patty d'Arbanville and William Katt in bed, in a bedroom somewhere. That's not in the movie.
This wasn't in the theatrical you saw?
So I don't know. The one in the Playboy article was not in the theatrical or the 60 millimeter print, or when it showed up on HBO. So yeah, I'm again. There, every film has all this wonderful missing stuff that would be very interesting to see, but it's not to be. We get some of it, but we don't get all of that.
Well, I guess that's it for this episode.
I'm gonna get on my surfboard and go surf off. I'm gonna catch a wave. Catch a wave. No.
Going with our generational differences, I'm thinking of a Weezer song right now. So that's it for this episode. Thanks everyone for listening.